Promise, we are about to do a little bit on the Indians who came to Jamaica. So we mentioned in the community that over 36,000 Indians came to Jamaica. So that was the period of 1845 and 1917. So can you guess why they came to Jamaica? What was happening in Jamaica at that time? So remember that we have the original people of the land. The very first people were called the Tainos, the Arawaks, right? Then from there we had colonization. So at that time we were colonized by the British. Slavery was, declared to be over, and we were in the indentured system. So because of that, slavery done, they needed more people to work on the plantations. There was something going on in the British India. So the socio-economic conditions were deteriorating, and they decided that they would come to Jamaica as indentured laborers under the Indian indentured system. So they mostly came from the Hindi speaking area and the Adwa region and other places of North India. A significant minority were from South India. Now, when indentureship were over, they could have settled in any part of the island or choose to go back to India, but more than two-thirds remain, and they made Jamaica their home. So it's no surprise that many of us have Indian relatives, ancestors, because a lot of Indians stayed behind and they got together with more groups and had us, many of us. Like for instance, there is a lot of Indian in my family from my grandfather's side. Now let's dive into it. So Indian workers were actually paid less than the ex-slaves who were of West African origin. While slaves were not paid for their labor when they were emancipated in the 1830s, their wages were more than those given to Indians. So the first ship carrying workers from India, the Maidstone, landed at Old Harbor Bay in 1845. It had 200 men, 28 women under 30 years old, and 33 children under 12 years old from various towns and villages in northern India. So the numbers arriving increased to over 2,000, and that was like 3 years later, at which point the Indian government halted the scheme to examine its working. The program then resumed in 1859 and continued until the outbreak of World War I. By the 1870s, stories of the hardships suffered by Indian indentured workers were causing disquiet on the subcontinent. Indian indentureship ended in 1917 to the Caribbean in territories of Jamaica, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Trinidad, Grenada, St. Kitts, Guadeloupe, and more. 2 shillings and 6 pence were deducted from their maga wages for rice and flour, dried fish or goat, peas and seasoning, which constituted their rations. Chicken received half rations, but the plantation managers were warned to treat the children well, with quarterly medical checkups provided. Well, in theory, that's what they're saying. The overwhelming majority of the immigrant laborers were Hindu, but little provision was made for their faith and cultural practices. Non-Christian unions were not recognized until 1956, and many by that time had accepted Christianity and adopted English name. Higher caste Indians were prohibited from immigrating to the Caribbean, so many did not give their family names as they embarked. Working on the plantation was no easy journey. Many were not allowed to leave the plantation without a permit. They had to pay fines or even were imprisoned if they did so. Many of the workers and their families suffer from yaws, hookworm, and malaria. That's sad. So the indentured labor, the conditions, it varied from between 1 year and 5 years, with the workers being released if they fell ill or, them buy themselves out of them contract. So after their indentureship ended, it could be that many wanted to stay or return home, but there was a lack of ships available to take them home. So that might have caused many of them to stay on. So ships, they refused to sail if not full, and at times were oversubscribed, leading to sometime expired workers being left behind. So during World War I, German submarine warfare and a lack of ships further cut the numbers able to return. The Indian government did not encourage the return of workers, as many were destitute, ill, or had lost touch with their own culture. The Indian workers tended their own gardens after the work on the plantation was done to supplement their diet. So, enough of those things that we love, like tamarind, they introduced it to Jamaica, cannabis, and the chillum pipe. So, of course, they had some Hindu festivals such as Diwali, even though, over time many became Christians, as we mentioned prior. So gradually, workers left the plantations for Kingston and took jobs that better utilized their existing and newly learned skills. The Indian community adopted English as their first language, and they became shopkeepers, barbers, fishermen, jewelers, shoemakers. So they got into the trade, and of course, we know them in jewelry, having a lot of stores in that area. Now, we mentioned before about their surnames, that they actually adopted many of the English names, right? Due to being in the country and, having generation after generation. But some families, they did take the names of the villages they came from in India, and also their one name was used as the surname for their children. Later on, when more merchants and businessmen immigrated in the early 20th century from India, they had more sounding names becoming more common, such as Mangaru, Partab, Baboram, Surju, Maiku, Marag Singh, Rambaran, Lala, Bandhu, and more. So Indians built bonds with other communities on the island, and they learned religious and cultural practices. And also we had interracial marriages between Indian and African communities. And that led to, a closer bond, closer cultural and economic integration. So we are very much proud of our Indian history. Now, what they contributed so much. The first thing that comes to mind when you hear Indian is probably, food, curry, right? But there's so much more that they contributed to our culture, such as music and dance and traditional dress, which were incorporated into the Jamaican culture. It is said that the Indians were the first to manage to grow rice in Jamaica, and that established the island's first successful rice mill in the 1890s. And of course, we mentioned the spices such as curry and turmeric, as well as traditional Indian food like curry goat, curried potato, eggplant, roti, kalaloo. But I'm also seeing that kalaloo is from Africa. Bitter gourd okra, and several other dishes, right? They also brought with them new plants and trees, including mango, jackfruit. We talk about the tamarind, neem, betel leaves, betel nut, and coolie plum. You can find elements of traditional Indian dress in the Jankono processions that we normally have triumphing, which we normally have the street parades with the music, dance, and colorful costumes. Enough Jamaicans participate in the Indian inspired cultural celebration like Jose, that is well known in Clarendon and is celebrated each August. And of course, we know of how they impact the jewelry industry. So they own a lot of the jewelry stores. And some Indians were able to buy generous properties as part of government land settlement schemes during the 1960s. In 1995, the government of Jamaica proclaimed May 10 as Indian Heritage Day in recognition of the Indians' contribution to the social and economic development of Jamrock. On March 1st, 1998, the National Council for Indian Culture in Jamaica was formed. It is the umbrella organization of Indian associations with the mission to preserve and promote Indian culture. So that's it for the Indians who came. Big up to the Indians. We love you. And that's one group, which is a part of or out of many, one people. As you know, Jamaica is a melting pot of races, cultures, cuisine, right? And we wanted to share more as to why that is. We'll be speaking on other groups throughout this month. We're gonna touch on the Africans, of course, the Chinese, the Jews, the Syrians, the Germans, and any other group based on our research. So that's it. We hope you learned something. We hope you